All right, let's take you back to an earlier global story and bring you a live update. The annual general meeting of the International Air Transport Association, IATA, has opened in Boston by adopting a resolution for global airlines to reach zero carbon emissions by 2050. Representatives of the world's major airlines are gathered in person for the AGM and a World Air Transport Summit that seeks to galvanize efforts towards a recovery in a sector that has suffered huge losses as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's speak to our U.S. correspondent. He's there for us, Sherwin Bryce-Pease. Sherwin, thank you for being with us. Sure, I mean, the airline industry looks different in a sense. We know that some airlines have fallen out the sky. These are the big ones, and I find it incredible. They're not only looking back at COVID-19, but ahead. So tell us about some of the deliberations and this commitment to reduce carbon emissions to net zero.
Well, Francis, this is the first in-person meeting that the IATA has held since 2019, cancelling their annual general meeting that was due to be hosted in Amsterdam last year. And I think emerging from this certainly are three pegs. The first is the fact that they are having an in-person summit, talking about how emotional they are to be back in the room with each other again. And I think that is a very important peg when we talk about the airline recovery and the global economic recovery, when we talk about a return to summits and conferences, the various venues that South Africa, for example, has in terms of international conference venues that have essentially for the last 2 years been standing empty. So to have in-person people, people in the room from around the world, having been vaccinated, certainly a big peg in terms of the recovery we see here over the medium to long term. The second peg, of course, is the economic recovery, and a great deal of emphasis being placed on the continued lockdowns that are really impugning and impeding the recovery. Willie Walsh, the Director General of the IATA, talking very, very pointedly about how it is no longer the coronavirus that is hurting the airline industry, but it is these very stringent lockdown measures, as was evidenced in the most recent spat between the United Kingdom and South Africa. The third peg here is what they are doing in terms of the broader global conversation. Climate change ahead of the UN Glasgow Climate Change Conference this year. They adopted a resolution that pledges certainly from global airlines to reduce their carbon emissions to net zero by 2030. So a lot of emphasis on the environmental impact of the continuation in aviation. And this was addressed by Salvatore Schiaccitiano. He is the president of the International Civil Aviation Organization. He spoke what they are seeking to do in terms of climate change. This is what he said. Watch.
For our sector, the dual imperative of recovery and emission reduction underscore that we cannot waste the opportunity before us for sectorial transformation and renewal. In addition to the retirement of less efficient aircraft types, which has been a very welcome development over the last 18 months, commercial aviation must be determined to pursue further transformation. Well, I would say that what is being continuously accomplished in that moment in terms of more sustainable fuels, technologies, and procedures cannot be ignored or undervalued. Innovation in these areas deliver win-win solutions toward our complementary imperative of sustainability and connectivity growth.
And I think, Francis, in addition to those statements in terms of what they are seeking to do as a global industry, they're talking about the increased use of bio-based sustainable aviation tools, new hybrid electric technology, carbon capture designs, and aircraft designs. For example, Airbus, one of the major aircraft manufacturers around the world, talking about having a zero-emissions aircraft in operation by 2035 using hydrogen-powered synthetic adaptation. So a broad-based conversation here around what the airline and aviation industry in terms of the broad efforts to reach the 2030 goals in terms of climate change, Francis.
Sherwin, you said earlier that Willie Walsh, the Director General, slammed the continued lockdowns. Just tell us a bit more about what he's had to say.
Well, Francis, they are talking here essentially about increased need for vaccinations. They look specifically at international travel, and their data shows that international travel based on CR tests that are a requirement, or the increased vaccinations, are really impacting domestic populations in terms of the transfer of COVID-19. Essentially, they are saying is international travel not bringing COVID-19 into domestic populations. Emphasis really on companies and countries, really looking at their stringent lockdown measures. Willie Walsh says that essentially it is these countries that are now economic recovery in terms of their lockdowns and not the coronavirus. He's also talked a lot about in terms of the economic recovery, what needs to be done. This is what he said in terms of airports companies like Airports Company South Africa increasing their fees on airlines that he believes will be then eventually transferred onto the backs of consumers. This is what he said earlier.
So in the case of Schiphol, I think it's very simple. Schiphol is owned by the government in the same way as airlines have had to go to their shareholders to raise additional equity or go to the debt market to raise debt to improve their liquidity. Airports should be required to do the same. You know, the idea that an airport can say, I lost, take for example, $1 billion in revenue last year because airlines didn't fly. So therefore, I'm going to recover that $1 billion by charging the airlines that didn't fly an extra $1 billion this year when they are flying. It's just complete nonsense. Can you imagine if airlines tried to do that? You know, that we charge you because you didn't fly last year. You know, you'd laugh us out of court. But what we have here are suppliers who are in effect monopolies or quasi-monopolies who believe that, you know, they can pretty much do what they like. And we're not going to tolerate that. You know, we're going to fight back against this.
So a big conversation certainly led here by Willie Walsh, the Director General of the IATA, about companies like Airports Company South Africa and others around the world that are now seeking to transfer their losses in the two airlines. They will certainly fight that in court.
All right, Sherwin, we have to leave it there. The line not great to you, but that's our U.S. correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease at the World Air Transport Summit, and we'll see if SABC News can join up with him in the next hour or so and update you on that very important summit happening in Boston in the United States.